Hello, I'm Tim Lawton, MP for East Worthing and Shoreham. I just want to return to the really concerning subject of school funding. This has probably been the biggest single issue in my constituency and indeed other parts of West Sussex for some time. Now, together with other Conservative West Sussex MPs, over the last couple of years, we've been lobbying the Department for Education and the government generally to give a fairer share of funding in our school system to West Sussex schools. For all sorts of historical reasons, going back many years, schools in West Sussex and pupils in West Sussex are right at the bottom of the pile for the amount of funding we get per child, and that's not fair. It's clear that there are going to be differences with other parts of the country, particularly with some of the more deprived London boroughs where there are some real challenges, but the gap between us and them is very wide. Now, after our lobbying, and it was successful, the government brought in a new funding formula so that that gap has been narrowed, but I'm afraid still not enough. In addition, last year, the government announced a further £1 billion being put into our schools, and West Sussex's share of that was some £28 million. Now, that was helpful, but there is still a big problem, and that problem is because over too many years, we've now got the accumulated effect of not having an appropriate level of funding. Lots of savings have been made, but that means there's very little left of further savings, and it's cut back to the bone. So that £28 million additional this year, which has gone to all schools, has given a bit of breathing space, but we have got to change the system so that sustainably our schools are better funded, because that's in the best interest of our children, and we've got to make sure they have the best start. So last year I got together, invited all the heads of the schools in my constituency for a round table to talk to them at first hand about the challenges we're facing. And at the beginning of the summer I did a similar exercise and invited all the governors from schools in my constituency, and virtually every school was represented, and we had a really constructive discussion. And as a result of that, I asked them to give me some specific examples of the challenges they are facing now, the cutbacks they've had to make already, or those cutbacks that they are having to consider because of the amount of funding that they've got at the moment. And many of those governors and schools were very helpful, stepped up to the mark, and have provided me with an awful lot of data. And today I've written quite an extensive letter to Damien Hinds, the Secretary of State for Education, setting out specific examples, anonymised across all those schools, of the impact that the lack of fair funding for West Sussex schools, and in my case those in my East Worthing Shoreham constituency, is actually having. These aren't theoretical. In most cases they are happening now, or they're decisions that are going to be happening in the very near future. So I shall be sending that letter off to Damien Hinds. I shall publish that letter on my website so you can see all the details and how seriously I'm taking this, along with my other West Sussex MP colleagues, in trying to find a fair resolution for our children. Some of the examples I've been given is there have been some loss of teachers, there have been some loss of teacher assistants. In some cases, some of the courses have been restricted. But in some cases, because salaries now account for something like 90% of the overall school budget, it's meant that people who've left or gone on maternity leave are not being replaced, or where they are being replaced, it's with less qualified, less experienced teachers on a lower wage. And there are obviously implications from that. The maintenance budget in schools is being affected. The amount available to buy new kit and technology is also being restricted. Some school trips and things like that. All these things are being impacted, and in varying degrees they clearly have an effect on the quality of schooling that our children are getting. Now, various things have happened. As I say, we have had some additional money, which has helped. We've also had, back in July, the government announced a pay award for teachers. So across the board, teachers are getting 3.5%, with exception of some of the high levels of teachers who are paid more. Now, the concern was, of course, who's going to pay for that 3.5% if it has to come out of school budget? Well, the government said that they would pay 2.5% of that from central funds, but schools still have to find 1%. And that's still quite a large amount, but it could have been worse. But secondly, we think the government needs to revisit the funding formula because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work properly for rural counties with some pockets of deprivation and real challenges, as we do have in West Sussex, particularly on the coastal strip. Now, the other issue which we've urged the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Education to look at is next year there's going to be a comprehensive spending review. So the Chancellor will look at spending on all departments across government. And we've reinforced to him just how important it is to use that opportunity to try and plug that gap for the additional funding we still need for our schools. The problem is the government has committed something like £24 billion extra a year for the National Health Service, which is fantastic. And we are really investing in our National Health Service. But it does mean that there's less money to go around for some of the other departments. But I've always believed, that's why I was Minister for Children, that what we do for our children, particularly at an early stage, is absolutely crucial and sets them up for life. That's why we've got to make sure our schools have got the proper resources to give children the very best start in life. And in West Sussex, we're just not getting quite that fair share of the cake they're getting in other parts of the country. So we'll be continuing to lobby the Chancellor in the comprehensive spending review to solve this problem once and for all. But there's also another idea I've come up with, and that's a Coastal Schools Challenge Fund. Some years ago, back in 2003, there was a real problem in London schools facing lots of challenges, largely because they have much more diverse populations where English is a second language for many more of the children. We've got a lot of deprived communities. Of course, we need to be spending extra on those children. And in order to make sure London schools were getting a fair share of the pot, the then Labouring government came up with the London Schools City Challenge Fund, which invested in those schools, and it showed results. That's one of the reasons why London schools are so much better funded now than compared with West Sussex. Well, I believe that there are parts of West Sussex, and indeed other coastal strips around the country, where we do have real challenges, where we don't have the more affluent residential areas that can afford to top up some of these educational demands, where we need to declare them as coastal school challenge areas, where we can focus more funding on those specific schools. And that's an idea I'm putting in my letter to the Secretary of State for Education, and I discussed with many of the governors. So what I'm trying to do is to give the Secretary of State for Education some real examples of the impact the funding situation is having on our schools now. Not theoretical, it's not some big political bandwagon that some people have tried to make this into. I'm only interested in seeing what exactly is happening now and how we can come up with solutions that will actually solve those problems. I've made some suggestions, and we're going to carry on lobbying for this, campaigning on this, and I'll work with parents and governors and teachers to make sure that the government does take this on board and that we produce the goods to make sure that my children, my constituents' children in West Sussex are fairly funded and are given the proper resources to have the best start in life that we owe all our children.